The atmosphere in the House chamber was charged, the kind of intensity that crackles in the air before a summer storm. Reporters were lined up against the walls, cameras at the ready, microphones poised to capture every sharp breath, every cutting retort. It was a day for fireworks, and everyone knew it. Adam Schiff, the senior congressman from California, had made a name for himself as a relentless critic of the Trump administration. He thrived in the heat of political battles, his sharp tongue a double-edged sword that had cut down many a seasoned opponent. But today, he had set his sights on a different target, Karoline Leavitt, the young but unflinchingly confident White House press secretary. Karoline, standing barely 5'6", exuded a presence that belied her age. She had become a household name, known for her quick wit and ironclad loyalty to President Trump. Her fiery press briefings often left even the most seasoned journalists scrambling for comebacks. Today, she was about to face one of her toughest public confrontations yet. The hearing room fell silent as Schiff adjusted his microphone, his gaze fixed on Karoline, who sat poised and alert, her hands calmly folded in front of her. He leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension as he began. "Ms. Leavitt," Schiff said, emphasizing the MS, as if reminding her of her youth, "we all know you're skilled at repeating the president's talking points. But today, I'd like to see if you can think for yourself. Can you tell this committee why the American people should trust an administration that has repeatedly bent the truth and misled the public?" The question hung in the air like a blade, the tension in the room palpable. Schiff's allies on the panel exchanged smug glances, clearly expecting Karoline to fumble or retreat under the spotlight. Karoline, however, didn't flinch. She straightened in her chair, her clear blue eyes meeting Schiff's steely gaze without hesitation. She had prepared for this, and she knew that standing down would only fuel her critics. "Thank you for the question, Congressman," she replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "I find it interesting that you question the truthfulness of this administration given your own history of selective truth-telling." A few muffled gasps echoed through the room. Schiff's jaw tightened, but he forced a thin smile, clearly caught off guard by her immediate counterstrike. "Let's talk about transparency, shall we?" Karoline continued, leaning forward slightly. "You've accused this administration of lying, but let's not forget your role in pushing narratives that turned out to be less than accurate. You spent years pushing the Russian collusion narrative, insisting you had evidence, yet, after millions of taxpayer dollars and countless hours wasted, the findings revealed nothing. A political witch hunt." The room grew quieter still, the press now fully focused on the young press secretary whose sharp words were cutting through the grandstanding like a hot knife through butter. Schiff cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Ms. Leavitt, this isn't about me. It's about the integrity of the office you represent. Don't you think the American people deserve a government that tells them the truth?" Karoline smiled, a flash of white teeth framed by a knowing, almost playful expression. "I agree completely, Congressman. That's why I'm here today, to set the record straight, to push back against narratives that distort the truth for political gain. I'm not here to play games. I'm here to stand up for the American people, even if it means challenging the powerful voices in this very room." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience, a mixture of surprise and approval. Schiff leaned back, clearly unprepared for such a fierce counterattack. Karoline had just made it clear that she wasn't going to be an easy target. Adam Schiff paused, taking a long breath as he reassessed the situation. For a moment, his confident demeanor faltered, the weight of Karoline's words sinking in. He had expected her to crumble under the pressure, a typical response from those less experienced in political combat. But Karoline Leavitt wasn't typical. The audience could sense the shift in the energy of the room. Karoline had just thrown a curveball, and Schiff, for all his seasoned experience, was momentarily on the defensive. He quickly recovered, though, flashing a tight smile before launching his next volley. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, his voice cool and controlled. "Your rhetoric is impressive, but we all know that words are only as good as the actions that back them up. The Trump administration has been caught in a web of contradictions and scandals. How can the public possibly trust someone who has repeatedly flip-flopped on key issues, whether it's COVID-19, immigration, or the economy?" Schiff's voice grew louder, his finger pointing in her direction like an accusation. Karoline, however, remained calm, not even a flicker of hesitation crossing her face. She had anticipated this line of attack. After all, Schiff's focus on contradictions was the easy route, an attempt to paint the administration as erratic. But Karoline wasn't about to let him control the narrative. "You're right, Congressman," she replied, her tone perfectly measured. "Words do matter. But actions matter more, and if we look at the results, let's talk about those for a moment. We see that this administration's actions have brought about historic levels of job growth, a reduction in illegal border crossings, and a robust economic recovery despite the global pandemic. The room shifted again as Karoline stood firm, her voice ringing with conviction. On COVID-19, we didn't just sit idly by. We led the charge in vaccine development, and the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed delivered a vaccine to the American people faster than any other country. That's a fact. So, let's be clear, it's easy to throw around words like flip-flopping, but when you look at the results, the record speaks for itself. Schiff's eyes narrowed, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of an emotional response. Instead, he shifted tactics, sensing that his usual attacks weren't working as well as he had hoped. Fine, Ms. Leavitt, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Let's talk about results. You claim the Trump administration brought historic job growth, but let's not forget the millions of Americans who were thrown into unemployment due to your administration's policies. Millions who are still struggling to make ends meet. How do you respond to that? Karoline leaned forward, her gaze locked onto Schiff's with a determination that was impossible to ignore. I'm not here to pretend that everything was perfect. The pandemic was a global disaster, and yes, we saw unemployment rise. But what this administration did, was step in to support the American worker. We passed the CARES Act, delivered stimulus checks, and worked to reopen the economy safely and responsibly. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. Unlike the Democrats, who seem intent on keeping everything locked down indefinitely, we prioritized getting Americans back to work. The results? Record job creation and a quick rebound from the economic disaster caused by the pandemic. For the briefest moment, Schiff seemed taken aback, perhaps realizing that Karoline had just turned his own arguments against him. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The committee members were watching closely, their eyes flicking back and forth between the two speakers. Karoline was holding her ground, and Schiff was beginning to lose his grip. But Schiff was a seasoned politician, and he wasn't about to let this moment slip by without a fight. With a sharp intake of breath, he continued. Let's focus on another area, Ms. Leavitt, he said, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice. You claim to be a champion of transparency and truth. But your administration has made a mockery of both. The press secretary's office has become a circus, with misleading statements, denials, and outright lies being issued on a daily basis. Do you really believe the American people are buying this act? Karoline didn't flinch. If anything, she leaned in even further, a look of quiet confidence on her face. Congressman, she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room like a knife, let me remind you that I'm here representing the American people, not the Washington elite. And while you and your colleagues in the media love to point fingers at the president and his administration, you've ignored the many truths that Americans actually care about. She paused for a moment, giving her words time to land. We've been transparent about our policies. We've fought for tax cuts for the middle class, deregulation to help businesses thrive, and a foreign policy that puts America first. You can try to spin it all you want, but the American people know the truth. They're seeing real results, something your party has failed to deliver. The room was now on edge, the tension palpable. Schiff could sense that he was losing control of the narrative, and that wasn't something he was accustomed to. He needed to turn the tables, and quickly. Adam Schiff's eyes narrowed as Karoline's words hit home. She wasn't backing down. And worse, she was turning every one of his attacks back on him with ease, making him appear not just ineffective but almost irrelevant in the eyes of the public. For a brief moment, Schiff considered changing tactics once again, perhaps playing to his base in the audience. But there was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, one that told him that no matter how much he tried, Karoline Leavitt wasn't the kind of opponent who could be easily shaken. Ms. Leavitt, Schiff began, his tone now noticeably cooler, more deliberate. I have to admit, you've done a fine job of avoiding the real issues. But let's get to the heart of the matter. Your administration has shown time and time again that it operates on chaos, on misinformation. The fact is, people don't trust the president, and they certainly don't trust you. Karoline remained calm, not a single muscle in her face betraying any sign of frustration. She'd been in high-pressure situations before, but this was a whole new level. Schiff had been trying to paint her as part of a larger problem, one of deceit and misinformation. But Karoline wasn't about to let that narrative stick. Congressman, she said softly but with steely resolve, I know you've been playing that particular tune for a while now, but let's be honest for a second. People trust results. They trust leadership that doesn't kowtow to special interests or to the media. And while the president and I might not always fit into the narrative you want to spin, the truth is that we've delivered for the American people. She leaned in as if to emphasize her point and then added in a quieter yet deliberate voice, "You see, Congressman, the American people don't want more of the same. They don't want empty promises from politicians who have been in Washington for decades speaking in circles. They want action." A soft murmur ran through the room. Schiff's grip on the situation was starting to slip even further. His words, once sharp and accusing, were losing their sting as Karoline's calm, rational responses made him appear more and more like a man shouting into the wind. But Schiff wasn't finished. He had one last card to play, a bombshell that he hoped would turn the tide in his favor. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of calculated strategy and excitement as he made his move. "All right, Ms. Leavitt," Schiff said, his voice rising once again. "Since you want to talk about transparency, let's talk about the president's business dealings. Let's talk about the way he's used the office of the president to enrich himself, his family, and his associates. Can you explain to the American people how that's not a conflict of interest? How that doesn't undermine the very notion of public service?" The room went silent. The reporters' pens were frozen in midair, the camera flashes paused. Schiff had just opened a Pandora's box, one that he hoped would force Karoline into a corner. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. It was a smile that seemed to say, "You want to play this game? All right, let's play." "Congressman," she said, her voice as steady as before, but with a slight edge now, "let me tell you something about conflicts of interest. You and your colleagues have spent years pushing baseless accusations against the president. You've attempted to launch countless investigations, all without any concrete evidence. Meanwhile, you've conveniently ignored the real conflicts of interest happening right under your nose." The audience leaned in, sensing that something major was about to unfold. "Let me ask you this," Karoline continued, her voice gaining momentum. "Do you really want to talk about conflicts of interest? Because if we're being honest, let's discuss the lucrative deals that members of Congress have received for their public service. How many of you have seen your net worth grow substantially while the American people continue to struggle? The answer is quite a few, Congressman. So maybe it's time to turn the mirror around and look at your own house before pointing fingers at others." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. For a moment, Schiff couldn't respond. He opened his mouth, then closed it again as if processing what she had just dropped. The committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Let me be crystal clear," Karoline continued, her eyes never leaving Schiff's. "The president has nothing to hide. He's been the most transparent president in recent history. His business dealings were all disclosed, and the media and political elites know this, but they'd rather create a narrative than report the facts. You've been on the attack for years, yet you've never been able to prove a single one of your accusations." For a moment, Schiff looked as though he had been punched in the gut. The bombshell Karoline had dropped wasn't just a defense of the president, it was a direct challenge to his integrity, his motives, and the very foundation of the accusations he had spent years pushing. The room was still, waiting for Schiff to respond. The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of Karoline's words. Schiff's face twitched, a mix of anger and embarrassment flashing across his features. He could feel the eyes of the room on him now, watching, waiting for his comeback. But Karoline had thrown the final punch in this round, and Schiff knew he was scrambling for a response. Adam Schiff's momentary silence spoke volumes. For a man known for his sharp rhetoric and relentless pursuit of political enemies, his inability to respond in the face of Karoline Leavitt's devastating counterattack left him exposed. The air in the room was thick with tension, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Schiff's usual quick wit and calculated retorts had evaporated under the weight of Karoline's words. A low murmur spread through the audience as Schiff fumbled for his next move. It was rare for him to be caught off guard like this, and even rarer for him to lose his composure in front of the cameras. But this time, Karoline had flipped the script, and the force of her arguments had hit too close to home. Taking a deep breath, Schiff finally spoke, though his words came out slower, more deliberate, as if carefully considering his next move. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, trying to regain some semblance of control, "you're right about one thing. This conversation isn't about just the president. It's about the people of this country who have been hurt by the very policies your administration supports. It's about those who have lost their jobs, their homes, and their dignity while your administration continues to enrich itself and protect its interests. You can deflect, you can point fingers, but at the end of the day, your record speaks for itself." But Karoline wasn't having it. She had already taken the high ground, and she wasn't about to let Schiff drag her back down into the mud with vague accusations and weak counterarguments. "Congressman," she said, her voice still calm, but with an unshakable firmness, "this isn't about protecting interests, it's about delivering results for the American people. Results that you and your colleagues have been too busy obstructing to notice. The truth is, you can't stand the fact that the president and his administration have done more for everyday Americans than any politician in Washington has in the last 30 years. She stepped forward, making sure that every word carried the weight it deserved. And let's be clear, you don't want to talk about policy, you want to talk about distractions. You want to talk about the president's business because it's easier than addressing the failures of your own party. And everyone here knows it. You know it. Schiff's face reddened, but he wasn't about to back down. He launched into another attack, his voice rising in a last-ditch effort to regain the narrative. Fine. Schiff spat. You want to talk about distractions? Let's talk about your role in perpetuating a dangerous lie that continues to divide this country. You and your colleagues have defended a president who has repeatedly undermined the very foundations of our democracy. You've stood by him as he attempted to dismantle the very fabric of our society. And don't think for a second that people don't see it. This time, however, Karoline didn't flinch. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. It was clear that Schiff's attempt to go on the offensive wasn't going to work. She had already dismantled his arguments. And now, she was preparing to deliver the final blow. Congressman, Karoline said softly, yet with undeniable power in her words. You've been on this crusade for years, chasing after an imaginary enemy. You've spent more time investigating the president than you have working on the issues that actually matter to the American people. While you've been chasing shadows, we've been working to secure our borders, rebuild the economy, and make America stronger than ever before. She paused for a moment, allowing the full force of her words to sink in. The difference between you and us, Congressman, is that we actually get things done. We don't spend all our time pointing fingers or playing the victim. We fight for the American people and we deliver results. It was a powerful declaration and the room fell silent once again. Schiff, for the first time in this debate, looked defeated. He had no response. None that could undo the damage Karoline had inflicted. As the silence lingered, Karoline turned to the moderator, who had been waiting for this moment to break the tension. If there are no further questions, I think I've made my point clear, she said, her voice calm, but with an edge of finality. I'm not here to play games. I'm here to fight for the American people. And that's what I'll continue to do regardless of the distractions thrown my way. The moderator nodded, clearly relieved to bring the heated exchange to an end. The committee members, who had been watching with rapt attention, exchanged glances, many of them realizing just how thoroughly Karoline had dominated the conversation. Schiff, realizing his position was untenable, glanced briefly at Karoline before stepping back. The audience, once tense and polarized, now seemed to settle into a quiet reverence for the spectacle they had just witnessed. Schiff had come in with the goal of embarrassing Karoline, but instead he had been left fumbling and backpedaling while she had emerged unscathed and, in fact, triumphant. As Karoline turned to walk off the stage, her colleagues and allies in the room gave her a nod of approval. She had handled herself with the poise and grace of a seasoned politician. Someone who had not only defended her administration but had done so with unmatched skill. But for Schiff, the damage was done. His reputation, once again, had taken a hit. His attempts to humiliate Karoline Leavitt had backfired in spectacular fashion. And as the cameras turned off and the room began to empty, there was only one question on everyone's mind. Could Adam Schiff recover from the bombshell that Karoline had just dropped? The buzz around the room was palpable. The press conference had just concluded and the once dominant narrative that Adam Schiff had tried to push had crumbled into dust. For Karoline Leavitt, it was a victory, one that she hadn't just earned through words but through a strategy that combined precision with poise. She had shown, in no uncertain terms, that she could not only handle the heat but thrive in it. As the cameras began to pack up, reporters huddled together, replaying the moments that would surely dominate the news cycle for the next several days. Clips of Karoline's calm, cutting responses to Schiff's attacks flashed across social media and news channels, dissected by analysts and commentators alike. The phrase bombshell trended instantly as millions of viewers flocked to their screens to see what had transpired in that heated exchange. In the aftermath, Adam Schiff was left to grapple with the fallout. His allies had been quiet and his critics were louder than ever. Though he was known for his resilience, this particular moment seemed to sting in a way the congressman hadn't anticipated. His public persona had been shaken, and while he could spin the story in his favor, there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind that he hadn't just lost a debate, he had lost a battle of perception. Schiff spent the next few days issuing statements, trying to reframe the narrative. He doubled down on the accusations of corruption, shifting the conversation back to the president's business dealings and his alleged conflicts of interest. But the sting of Karoline's bombshell couldn't be erased by words alone. He had hoped to put her on the defensive to embarrass her in front of the country, but the tables had turned and the public wasn't quick to forget the way she had handled herself. Meanwhile, Karoline was riding high on the wave of victory. The White House press secretary had once again proven herself to be a force to be reckoned with. Behind closed doors, she received praise from the president's inner circle. They recognized the significance of the exchange not just as a victory for Karoline personally, but for the broader administration. "I've never seen you handle an adversary like that, Karoline," one of the president's top advisors told her during a private briefing. "You didn't just defend the president, you made Adam Schiff look like he didn't know which way was up." Karoline gave a modest smile but remained humble. "I'm just doing my job," she replied. The truth speaks for itself. The American people deserve leaders who will fight for them, not hide behind baseless accusations. Her words resonated with those around her. Karoline had long been known for her sharp intellect and her ability to stay composed under pressure. But this moment had solidified her position not just as a press secretary, but as someone who could command the room and take down her political adversaries with ease. The media, sensing the shift in the political tide, now turned its focus to Karoline's growing influence. Political pundits on both sides of the aisle speculated that she was becoming one of the most powerful figures in the White House. A force in her own right, capable of leading the charge in defending the administration against its critics. As the weeks passed, the effects of the debate rippled through the political landscape. Schiff's credibility had been damaged, and his attempts to regain the narrative only highlighted the gaps in his arguments. In contrast, Karoline's stature had only grown. She was praised not just for her ability to outmaneuver Schiff, but for her commitment to transparency, her sharp policy insights, and her unwavering defense of the president. But for Karoline, it wasn't just about winning debates or dominating the headlines. It was about the bigger picture, the policies, the people, and the country she was fighting for. The debate had been just one chapter in a larger story, and while it had undoubtedly been a high point, she knew the real work lay ahead. In the days following the confrontation, Karoline sat down with the president for a private conversation. He was the one who had originally brought her on as press secretary, recognizing her potential to push back against the media and political establishment. Now he saw the full extent of her abilities. "Great job with Schiff," the president said with a grin, leaning back in his chair. "You took him apart in ways I didn't think were possible. You've got a gift, Karoline." She smiled, grateful for the praise but quick to refocus. "Thank you, Mr. President. But there's more to be done. We can't let this moment distract us from the work we still have ahead. The American people are looking to us for leadership, and I won't let them down." The president's smile widened, impressed by her resolve. "That's the attitude I like to hear. Keep it up. You've got a lot of people behind you." And with that, Karoline Leavitt walked away from that moment not only victorious in her exchange with Adam Schiff, but with her position solidified as one of the most formidable voices in the White House. Her future, it seemed, was brighter than ever, and her ability to handle the political battles ahead would only grow stronger from here. For Adam Schiff, the aftermath was a reminder that in politics, the tides could shift unexpectedly. His attempts to humiliate Karoline Leavitt had only made her stronger, and he would have to work harder than ever to regain his footing. But for now, the headlines belonged to her, and the victory was hers alone.